Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to help you to open your mind, get curious about yourself, and raise your consciousness levels. Through these conversations, we hope that you will go on an inward journey to discover the truth of who you are and become the conscious creator of your life. I am your host, Karen Maloney, and I work as an inside-out coach, mentor and guide, helping women to revolutionize their internal chatter and create a life they love. Listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you choose. And be sure to like, subscribe, review, and share the podcast. Check out my website as well, soulpowerlight.com, for more info. Hello everybody. How are you all doing? It is me, Karen Maloney, and thank you for joining for another episode. Quickly, before we get into today's brilliant guest again, I just invite you to join my mailing list if you so wish. And the easiest way to sign up to it is go to my Instagram page at soulpowerlight.com and click the link in the bio, and it is top of those links. I look forward to seeing you there. Today's guest joining me is Dr. Alison J Kay, and Dr. Alison has secrets no one else uses to upgrade, inspire and disrupt all patterns within her community and the collective. She is an award-winning #1 international best-selling author and the founder of the Vibrational UPgrade System. She is an experienced subtle energies practitioner and natural healer with a holistic approach towards helping others thrive in mind, body and spirit. This is reinforced by her 10 years in Asia studying subtle energies and ancient wisdom. With 20 plus years working in and teaching yoga, meditation, energy medicine, MindBody Fitness, longevity and holistic health with a specialized focus on the Chakra System, Dr. Alison brings a unique perspective that facilitates massive change. Her mission is to support the next higher evolution of the collective and create change for the health of this planet and those who are ready to unleash every part of the magic within them. So this was a beautiful conversation with Dr. Alison that I really enjoyed, and she talks about how she is not into the whole struggle paradigm and believes we don't need to struggle to get to and be the happiest, most thriving version of ourselves. And, I totally agree with her, but unfortunately, sometimes we wait to get ourselves in a right knot before we decide to make change. But in this conversation as well, she shares how her 10 years spent in Asia and really understanding subtle energies, she realized that people here in the West would thrive so much more if they knew about energies and subtle energy systems and consciousness and how it flows and how to work with it. So that's kind of what we talk about in this conversation, and she shares what consciousness means to her, how we can connect to a field of unlimited possibilities, and also what exactly subtle energies are and how we're all being invited to come back to ourselves right now and really get that yin-yang balance, that masculine-feminine balance within us all. So, beautiful conversation. She has lots to share, and she even loved that I call myself an inside-out coach because, as she says, inside first and the outside follows, and that's exactly it. And I think I'm going to even rob that little phrase that she used as well, because that's exactly it. So enjoy this conversation. I'm sure you'll get lots from it, and you can check out more on her work on her website, www.Alison, the letter J, and then K, Kay.com. So AlisonJK.com. But as always, I will have everything linked from the show notes on my website, soulpowerlight.com, and click the podcast section. Enjoy. Welcome everybody, and thank you for tuning in and joining once again. As always, I have another wonderful guest for you, and today joining me is Dr. Alison. So first of all, you're very welcome and thanks for joining today.
Cheers. I'm really happy to be here, especially that you're so much closer. Instead of being in Ireland, you're down just south of me in Oaxaca, Mexico, across the Gulf.
I know, how amazing is that? And there's already been a few synchronicities in between where I'm from and where I'm currently at, and the Mayans and different energies like that. So it's really interesting. I'm sure we'll have a fascinating conversation, and super excited to talk a little bit more about your work, which is really fascinating to me. And but maybe first of all, just if you could share a little bit on your background, or kind of what led you to the work that you're doing now.
Well, it's just always been a part of me, really. It's been a matter of allowing and creating the space to cultivate it and bring it more forward. I'm not one of those people who has the story of the pain and crisis that caused me to seek out some kind of natural or alternative medicine to heal that crisis or suffering. Not that. I've always been this way. And I say it with the tone that you perceive my saying this with, because when I got back from that decade in Asia studying subtle energy and consciousness, and I was posed by PR people what I should be doing in their formula of what pitches in PR look like. One of the models was that I was supposed to present that story, my journey, and I don't even ever use the word journey. I just use the word path. In the way they posed it was, what crisis did you have that you got stronger from? And I say right out of the gate nowadays on my free monthly call, if you're addicted to the struggle paradigm, I'm not the mentor for you. Because I look at using energy. So I came back from that decade in the East to the West, recognizing that, man, if we in the West had a better understanding of what else becomes possible when we start going internally instead of externally, there would be so much more thriving. And so, to answer your question in a more linear way, that might be helpful. I grew up going out in the forest, tromping through the woods, my older brother and I, after school every day and on the weekends. I was really lucky to live in a rural area about half hour south of Boston. Not there now, haven't been there for decades. And he would be jumping on the broken tree limbs, you know how boys do that? Yeah. And I would be like looking around at the elementals and down on my knees with like the clovers, and over in the creek with the dragonflies, and just walking barefoot on the rocks. And so I was always just totally connected to all of it. And so then, like in my teens, I started to write through a journal, and allowed my higher self to be more connected with through that journal writing, and just really stayed connected and grew that connection with that voice. And started to meditate in my early 20s. I had a political career synchronistically, and it was about protecting the environment and getting people elected to state and federal Congress who would write legislation that would protect the environment. It was very strategic. I loved it. And so I was really successful at it. And because of the success, they kept putting me in more and more intense campaigns. So I was walking through a bookstore, and a book on meditation literally leapt off the shelf, stopped me in my tracks. And I, from there on in, have been meditating. And I had already been going to like the Chinatown in San Francisco. This is where I was living at the time. And, you know, reading the I Ching and really into the Chinese culture. I had taken a yoga class my first semester in college. And so then after this all, fast forward, I ended up, after my master's in public administration, to help then go into an organization to help protect the environment in a more, I would say, standardized way. I realized, you know, that feeling when you talked about Ireland and how you felt and why you're in Mexico. You know, did any of this relate, like when you feel just doors closing, like no open? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I got done with my master's, and so I took it as the sign it was meant to be, and I stepped back and asked some questions to my higher self, and realized that, you know, the fossil fuel industry in the marketplace wasn't ready to shift, and so it wasn't time for me that wasn't the best placing for me. So I ended up, meanwhile, I had gotten trained in my first energy medicine. My last year in my master's, had been teaching meditation to the local adults in a community center for a couple of years at that point. So I recognized, okay, if change is going to happen, let's do it one consciousness at a time. So I went into the classroom relying on my bachelor's, ultimately, which had been in English Lit, after a psych major for 3 semesters, realizing they weren't showing me how to be the happiest, most thriving version of myself. So yeah, in the classroom, running energy medicine sessions, picking up more modalities on the side, and still teaching meditation now to students and after school clubs who were labeled with ADD and ADHD. And then wasn't totally digging 2.5 years into that, my income. And I only had a minimal student loan. I had worked all the way through my master's and had a master's, and on a public school teacher's salary, still wasn't able to go beyond a level of basic housing and basic car. That's all I needed, but organic food, and a massage per week for preventative health. So then I was also in a session with a client, and it was a woman, and we're like in session 3. My hands are over her second and third chakras. She was really pleased. So was I with the results she was already getting. So I looked up into the sky, even though I was inside, and I asked, okay, how do I get even more robust results for my clients? So these two things kind of coalesced, and I found out about the international school system through a synchronicity and did what I had to do, went to the city in the United States where all the different international school heads were coming in from all over the world, and did a bunch of interviews. Really fun weekend where there were chairs waiting outside each of the hotel rooms, and each hotel room was like a different country basically. And so I was like interviewing in Colombia in the morning, and in the early afternoon Lebanon, in the late afternoon Moscow, and in the next day it was Taiwan in the early morning. And so I was all over the world. World trip.
Amazing.
I ended up going into Asia because I understood that that's what they understand, how energy flows in consciousness, and that they still operate from it. Whereas here in the West, it went underground after the alchemists during the Age of Reason into like the mystery schools and the secret societies. So there you go. Yoga teacher training in India during that time, Qigong teacher training in Taiwan and Thailand during that time, and came back here with that mission of, man, we would have so much more thriving in the West if we understood the subtle energy system and how to work with it. And so here I am.
Totally. Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And, I love the fact that you didn't have that crisis to get stronger, because, a lot of people do. And as I always say as well, it's not necessary. Like, it's 1,000,000% not necessary. And how you cultivated and managed to stay connected the whole time is brilliant, because we all have that connection. But again, a lot of us fall out of it and then go through these crises and pains, before we reconnect. And so much of what you said there as well, connected with me, and especially that question of what else is possible and the struggle paradigm. Like, why is it that way in the West? Like, it's totally not necessary, but why does it have to be an individual self-explored journey in the West? Because it's not validated. Whereas, these ancient cultures and in Eastern culture and philosophies, like, they still look as a person as, the whole being, as opposed to just the physical and the physical material world, where we have that overemphasis here in the West, which, I believe is why we're at where we're at in this tipping point. But so much of what you said as well, so many questions came up. But first, I'd love to just, so many different angles to go on. But first, I'd love, because, obviously it's in the name of the podcast as well, consciousness, and it's something I adore, and living from, that state of consciousness. But I know it's something that people often still may struggle with to grasp the concept. So I'd love to know what's your definition of consciousness, or how you explain it.
It's a great question, really. As I look over my computer's lid and I see my Irish Blessings tea towel and my picture of Goddess Bridie, or Bridget.
Bridget.
And then I look over to see my Buddhist pink flowers that I brought back from Asia, and then the Mayan ruins, magnets. And
amazing.
It's so totally where we're at. I'm really happy to be here with you, Karen. So the consciousness, what do I define it as? So remembering that I do have that background in psychology and formal training for 3 semesters, and then later I ended up being asked to teach. I created a global psychology class at the high school level in the international school in Taiwan I was at.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess it is a wow.
That's pretty cool, especially in a school. If it was a mainstream type school, I think having those elements is vital now more than ever.
Yeah, and it was part of why I was attracted was to come out of the constriction of the public school system. While I could make teaching about meditation and Qigong, an after-school club particularly geared towards inner city boys who were getting labeled left and right with ADD and ADHD when it wasn't that. It was the environment. Then that was about as far as I could go. So there was more liberty in the international school system, particularly in this lovely school I was at in Taiwan. So yeah, it's good to recognize that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So building on that, I used text. The Dalai Lama had meetings every other year with Western scientists, psychologists, behavioral specialists, neurologists, and so he has books that came out of those biannual summits. And so some of those were some of the texts, and then the College Psych 101 book. And then I was asked to teach AP psychology. So it was interesting to go back in, like after I'd already been meditating and teaching meditation for, I don't know, at that point, around 18 years, to then review what psychology says the hardwiring of the brain is. So this response to you comes from a real combination of the Eastern and Western understanding. Consciousness as defined by only me, no one else. So please understand that. You're not going to get this in Webster's. It's like if you take the brain, let's just say there's 3 levels of consciousness from the Western perspective. There's the conscious mind, which is the frontal lobe, and those are the thoughts that we hear when we are present enough to observe our thoughts and have even enough detachment to be able to observe our thoughts rather than be our thoughts.
Yeah.
And then there's the subconscious. Sub means under, so it's not the thoughts we hear. And then there's the unconscious. Un means not conscious, so again, not the thoughts we hear. 85%, and that's generous. I would say it's more like 90 to 95% of where we're making our daily robotic choices from. And it is, in fact, why we live robotically, unlike you, Karen, picking up and moving to Mexico, is from that sub and unconscious, where it's robotic based on the old, like trauma, subconscious, when we're growing up and we're looking around after age 2, once we start to separate from our parents and form our own self-identity. As we develop, we're looking around asking, like, how do I get that loving feeling from my parents? How does life on planet Earth work? What is needed for me to get that smile that my brother gets from my mom? Oh, I have to be a good little girl and be neat and tidy and dress. But wait, my dad, what about my dad? My dad, how do I get that approving smile from my dad? Age 4, let's say, older brother, age 6, let's say. Well, my older brother seems to do a lot of sports with my dad. So I guess if I do sports with my dad, I'll get a lot of approval. And then that approval doesn't happen, that good feeling doesn't happen. And then we go into like, oh my God, sports is bad, being a tomboy is bad. I guess if I dress in frilly dresses, wait, look, Dad loves that. So then goes an unconscious conclusion, for example, of if I dress like a pretty little girl, then I get more approval. So those are the different levels of consciousness, but I want to make it clear, it's here bringing in more of the Eastern. Here, this is not just up in the head. When we bring the chakra column, consciousness is contained in every cell. It is contained, so every chakra is an epicenter, let's say, or an urban center for an intersection of the mind, the body, and the spirit. It's an epicenter of consciousness. So by me working through there to do these clearings on the different levels of consciousness, the way I just named them, I'm able to get at the whole system in a much more robust way. But you know how, like, when you do some kind of, I don't think it's the fire ceremony you mentioned, Karen, but maybe it's something a little bit lower key, a little bit more yin. And as you're starting to have like a shift, do you ever notice your tummy gurgles?
Yes, I would notice that because I do Reiki and integrated energy therapy as well, and I'd notice, or if I get my bars run or anything by someone else, I'd often notice my stomach gurgling, or if I was working on a client, their stomach gurgling, and I always love to hear it.
Yeah, by the way, when I asked what else is possible, speaking of Access, that was decades before I ever found Access. It's so funny, when I did find Access, I was like, and I had written my first book's title that I wrote in the last year over there in Asia was, that started out as my dissertation, and then it became, what if there's nothing wrong? And I never knew Gary Douglas, the founder of Access, said that either. So when I did find them, I had Gary, I had Dane a couple times on my radio show, and Simone, and I was just like, found like I was meeting kin.
Yeah.
So yeah, the gurgling. I remember one time when I was of the tummy. I remember one time when I was in Taiwan and I was driving back on my scooter with fresh yogurt just made it organic at a health food store, and it was in my black box at the back of my scooter. And I drove home, and I swear to God, I felt like I was driving kindergartners, like jumpy, happy, joyous energy behind me in the jars of the live bacteria in the yogurt.
Wow.
So our guts have that consciousness. Bacteria is very conscious. So I just want to point that out, that our food has consciousness in how you feel. I don't want to say our food has consciousness. Our food has vibrations. It depends if it's cooked, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right? So everything has consciousness, the bottom line.
Yeah.
Consciousness would be considered as universal life force energy or chi prana.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. And yeah, we are pure consciousness. The universe is consciousness. Everything has a consciousness. And like you mentioned, that energy or that consciousness coming from the foods as well. There's been so many studies done of foods or plants, and when they're talking to lovingly versus, shared really horrible, really negative things, how one flourishes and the other disintegrates. So, for me, and my work as well and what I do, I call myself an inside out coach, because for me, the huge shift in changing my internal world, and especially how I spoke to myself, because that shit lands, our cells are living organisms. They are listening to every single thing that we say, and our subconscious mind takes it verbatim. It doesn't argue. So that's why we need to really connect within and clear out those old conditionings, like you mentioned, our environment, the influence our environment has in us. Like we all have limiting programs or beliefs, and that's okay in a sense, but it's when we truly start to connect back to ourselves and our truth and clear out what doesn't serve us anymore, then we can live from that place of pure consciousness. And I love what you said earlier as well, one consciousness at a time. And, I believe that's kind of the shift we're going through at the moment as well. And something else I just love to touch on, taking that aspect of consciousness and kind of what's going on in the world as well. And I know you often talk about collective programs and old paradigms, and I think it's extremely topical now. But what is the collective, and, maybe helping people understand actually how we are all so interconnected.
Okay, how long do we have?
Yeah, not hugely long. But, and again, this is not, a topic that I'm speaking about for the first time. Obviously, a lot of the conversations are very similar, coming from different people's backgrounds, sharing the same information in different ways. And that's what helps people as well to connect in different ways. And I think especially when it's something new, or someone is that shift of, what else is possible? Is there more to life? I'm not feeling this struggle paradigm anymore. I'm ready to explore and see what I'm more capable of, what's more capable out there in the universe. So I think it's just always really interesting to maybe reiterate some of these topics of the collective, especially, that can seem again a bit like, what is that, hard to grasp for people.
Okay. So Karen, first of all, I just want to address something that you just said, because so much what you just said was just so juicy for me. What do you call yourself? An inside coach or an internal coach?
Inside out.
Inside out. That's brilliant. Okay. There's a traditional Chinese medicine tenet, one of the foundational laws of TCM, and it's where chi goes, meaning vital life force energy, blood follows. Quantum physics confirms that. Yeah. And I add on to that, where our consciousness goes, energy follows. And where energy and consciousness go, then the physical gets created or follows. So all of our power is inside of us. And once we clear out these blocks, these conditionings, and I'll talk about the collective in just a moment, then we're more able to connect with what I call the field of unlimited possibilities. My third book, called Reasonable Dragons, I actually recorded an audio version. It's the only book of my 4 that's in an audio version, and I did it in the UK, right outside of Glastonbury, after I had finished training a bunch of vibrational upgrade practitioners, tuning them and taking them to sacred sites, and you can feel the light. People rave about that audiobook and the subtitle of it. The only reason why I'm bringing it up is because it's where logical magic is the new norm, and you're connected to the field of unlimited possibilities. So once we clear out the weight, the density of our old beliefs that we don't even hear, but we're creating our lives from choice by choice, whether they're from collective conditioning, collective beliefs, or they're from some of the more like the familial ones when you're growing up, like the examples I gave earlier, or it's trauma, or it's karma, or it's past life contracts, or it's imprints from your parents and lineage, etc. I could go on, I won't. But once we clear that stuff out, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's a project and it's long term, but it is both those things. You do hit a threshold where you start to become more aligned and opened to the consciousness all around us, and then that's when we connect to that field of unlimited possibility. So there is
love that. Yeah.
You might like Reasonable Dragons, Karen. I'm glad you like that. It's just, we're so not alone.
Yeah.
And in the ego mind. So the basic Buddhist tenet is every human mind is neurotic. And so here are the tools with which to work with your own particular flavor.
Yeah.
I.e. meditation and all of the sutras on the nature of the mind. My first signature talk was called The Nature of the Mind. It's still on my website, actually. It's the least expensive thing on my shop. It's like the most life-changing. So I say all of this because it's all such an inside first, then outside follows job. And so you're well named. Love what you call yourself.
I love it too, and I can't claim to it because I was, the usual banging my head against the wall going, what am I going to use? And I was exploring different things, and then just one day it just popped in and I was like, oh my God, I love it.
That's that guidance getting your back. All of life is happening for us, not to us. That's an important conversion to make. All of life is happening for me, not to me. Because I'm on the end of my second book. I'm going over to one of the main guys who brought yoga to the West, specifically North America, specifically the US, from India in the 70s. He opened the first holistic center up as a bird.
I know, it's beautiful.
He opened up the first holistic center up in Massachusetts. And so he then had an ashram down here in Florida. And I had been running so many one-on-one energy medicine sessions and holistic health and wellness coaching that I was curious. I was seeing myself more spacey, less grounded, a bit fatigued. And I was dealing with a lot of people's health stuff. As well as people's consciousness only, when they were coming to me saying, I feel like there's this gray cloud around me, or I feel dull and lethargic, I just don't feel like myself. So it wasn't always health issues, but health issues definitely require me to go higher. I barely work with health issues anymore. And so why am I saying all this? Because I went to him wanting to understand what is the effect of my system from running so much energy medicine, so much of this vital life force energy or prana or chi through me day in and day out. Back session. He didn't really have an answer for me, but what he did do, he became my client, for God's sakes. He was body work. And so on one of the sessions I asked him, Gurudev, is it the same, this is from the yoga studies, if we call prana universal life force energy, and it's flowing through us the more that we clear and get aligned, and it's flowing through all of life, is another way to say it soul force, which is Turiya. It has a name in Sanskrit. And he said, yes, it's also could be considered soul force. And so then I asked him, Gurudev, could it also be considered love force, like unconditional love permeating through all of existence? He looked at me, smiled, and nodded. And that story ends my second book. And I treasure that because it's that second book is actually it's called Vibrational Upgrade, A Conspiracy for Your Bliss. Our systems are set up. Oh, it's a huge woodpecker. He just landed.
Oh, fabulous.
Which means drum new rhythm in life.
Oh,
so
amazing.
Shift you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's of my 4 books. That's the book that goes most into the shift. My second one, Vibrational Upgrade, A Conspiracy for Your Bliss. And my publisher knows my work. And so he said, you have to have this as a subtitle, Easing Humanity's Evolutionary Transition. So that book that has what you just 2 things that you just asked about in it. And when I came back from Asia a year in, I was doing nothing whatsoever about the Mayan galactic alignment. Nonetheless, Voice America approached me to do a radio show about it. I asked them to give me 48 hours to sit with it and hear my guidance. And it was a big, huge yes, neon letters. And so I did. And I ended up being able to interview specialists and experts and scientists, both who I quoted in my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong, but then started to bring on more about the Mayan galactic alignment. I ended up on a cruise being the energy medicine practitioner and yoga and meditation teacher with a bunch of these specialists, ultimately on December 21st, 2012, to Chichen Itza. We got special permission to be with a Mayan shaman at Chichen Itza, and I could go on about that, but the point is, yeah. So the bottom line, though, my understanding, and through all of this different research with experts, and then later going to other Mayan ruins, like the one closer to you, Teotihuacan outside of Mexico City, we hired a native guide, and I asked him, like, this is now 2019, so it's 7 years later, what's the difference between the old era that ended, that 2012 marked, and the new era? He said, well, the old era was about destruction. The new era is about construction. Mm-hmm. So it's working together. And so what I understand is that we've seen such a collapse in the last 9 years or so of so many paradigms and so much upheaval and so many protests in the streets that are in cities and countries that don't typically have protests. Yeah, because we are really seeing the end of an old era where there's been stuff of destruction, and where there has been stuff of destruction, whether it's organizations or the way we do our education or the way we do our money or any way that we talk to ourselves or any patterns or habits we have, in where it's been there has been abuses of power, all of that, like the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter, all of this is coming to the surface so that we can now, as we move into what I consider the second stage, so to speak, from 2012 to 2032, in that 20-year window, where we've now turned the corner and are moving into the time of the actual building of, and our choices are central. Co-creative empowerment is the key to construct this new era together with the choices that we make. So the more and more clear each of us get, including of collective fears, like, for example, I had and have a lot of Catholic clients, and when, not that they're the only clients I have, but when I have had them, I started to notice a pattern. There is a particular fear in them of going inside and looking at their thoughts, because there is a particular flavor of indoctrinated fear about there's a boogeyman under the bed, or there's a monster in the back of my head, or the crazy. Just, I have to be afraid of it. There's something inside of me I need to be afraid of. And so that's an example of a collective belief, twisted whatever way and framed whatever way that it may apply to you. Or maybe you're Catholic and it doesn't apply to you at all, and hallelujah. But I'm just talking about a pattern I observed, naturally wasn't looking for it, but it just started to accumulate in its evidence over time. So that's an example of a collective belief that we would want to clear, so there's a lot of unconscious collective beliefs, like, especially even if you look at the abuse of the earth, and if we talk about the earth being considered Gaia, feminine, and the sun being yang, masculine, and we look at the abuse of the earth, and then we look at the abuse women. Let's just keep men out of this and keep it in a gender in this one example, where women heap abuse on their body with their body image, and we twist it and contort it to make it look a certain way. That's, again, abuse of the feminine. So there has been this indoctrinated collective unconscious belief around disregard of the feminine and honoring the masculine, the yang, in each of us. So action, external action, like we're so used to in the West, without internal reflection, like they're so used to in the East. Internal reflection's more yin, seeding an idea, listening to your intuition's more yin, taking action, being focused on the external is yang. And so we need those two in balance, whether in me or in our society's institutions and collective. So that's shifting too.
Yeah, for sure. I loved all that you shared there as well. And, it's so funny, but it is that unconscious, we do all hold things within us individually and collective, because, even as A Course in Miracles would say, we're all an idea in the mind of God, God, universe, source, whatever word you use. It has nothing to do with the Catholic religion or image of God. And, that then to me means that, anything that anyone thinks or feels, it's that whole connection. It's the consciousness. It travels. It's energy. It feels, even though we're not conscious of it, it does have a role to play. And I believe that's the part of the reason, the shifts we're going through as well, we haven't been in that masculine energy. And I, as a person, lived in my masculine energy. I was completely cut off my feminine. I didn't even know what it was. And I think, that's where we've got to this place in the earth as well of like plunder and destroy and create and achieve and take and hoard, So I love that it is that co-creative empowerment again for each of us, and that rebalancing again for each of us, because we all have masculine and feminine energy. And it is, we're all being asked now to look at what we're holding within, to look at what's unconscious, to look at, where are we judging ourselves or others, to come back into alignment, to come back into balance, so then we can all come back into balance. And I believe, it is that the more people that do that, it is that tipping point. And I love how you mentioned as well, up until 2032, that rebuilding. And it's funny, it reminded me of a conversation I had with Diana Cooper, who is from the UK. And I had her on the podcast, it must have been last year sometime. And she was talking about how we are on the way to the great new golden age, the golden era of 2032. And when we land at that, the energies are going to be much higher than at the time of Atlantis. But as you say, this is the time of really dismantling the old, what no longer serves us, and seeing the shadows. Like that, we cannot move through them until they're seen. So it's exposing, but it's coming back to that truth and alignment and community and connection again, and getting rid of the separation. So I love that. And on the Catholic side of things, growing up in Ireland, I think, yes, definitely there was that fear of there's an all condemning God, and that's not the truth at all. So much of what you said there as well, and even given steps of us all being called to get clear and come back into alignment to ourselves is really important as well, that people can take with them. So, I mean, there's still so much coming up that I'd love to ask, but time is flying by. But I would just love to quickly touch on, when you talk about subtle energies, what do you talk about there, or how are they different?
So the Tibetans have a range of a spectrum, and they go from crude to subtle as a way to label existence. And so when looking at energy, there's an entire spectrum of more and more subtle, and then the more we get to physicalization, it becomes more and more crude. Not to say it's gross, but it's gross and unwieldy, meaning it's a rougher. Once something physicalizes, it takes more energy to work with it. So how do I mean that? I mean that when I was doing work on health issues like chronic back pain or tumors, it took a lot more subtle energy. I had to go higher, and it took longer to break something down, to dematerialize the matter back into energy. When we're working with still, let's say, thoughts, beliefs, trauma, emotions locked up, all of that is more on the subtle spectrum, and the sooner I can get to it, the more subtle it is, the easier it is to clear. So subtle energy, like even if you did the exercise that it happens a lot in Qigong, of putting your palms about a foot apart and feeling the energy between your palms and the tingling of your fingers as you slowly bring them together, that's you developing a sense of energy. But you may not be noticing the more subtle transmission that's going on from my voice. You may not have noticed that you may have sat up straighter, or you may have had your tummy gurgle, or you may have yawned, or you have had a couple of keys and codes activated within you that were at the unconscious latent level, but now you're going to have new awarenesses after you've listened. That's much more subtle, and many people don't track with that until they've done enough peeling back of the cruder stuff that we're more attuned to living in our conditioning. Once we start the peeling back of that, we can start to attune to more and more subtle. And the interesting, most beautiful thing that I love about the divine is that level, that sense of humor, because it's almost like the more powerful is actually the most subtle.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's like what they say, lighten up. And that's literally, that's no joke. That is literally what we're doing. And that's literally what we're doing when we are connecting more to, say, our emotional body, our mental body, our spiritual body, creating practices that support us, whether prayer, meditation, being in nature. We are literally, and I think this is the plight of the human journey as well, and especially in the Western world, we have got so dense. We are literally so dense with energy because we are so overly focused on our physical body and everything physical material in the world. And when we live that way, it doesn't bring long-lasting success or fulfillment or joy because it is dense. It is literally so freaking dense and heavy. So we literally have to lighten our load. And how do we do that? We go within. We do practices. We see what we need to see within us. We make better choices. We expand our vision. We create new possibilities. We open up our perspective. We open up our consciousness and our curiosity. So I love that as well. And what a powerful, message as well that I got from what you were sharing. But I'd love for you to please, if there's anything else that you would like to share before we wrap up, please do that now, or anything that you feel is particularly important for people to bear in mind. And please also share where people can find out more about your wonderful work.
Karen, I'd love to respond to everything you just said. I have another interview in 10 minutes though, so I can't. But I love this. Thank you for such an enriching conversation. God, yes, to density. I just was recalling the other night I gave an event and there were a couple of obese people on there, and how much more tired I was afterwards. They were kind of like beginners and hadn't done a lot of clearing, and just the density, and then the density gets trapped in the density. Fat carries most toxins out of anything, and muscles don't the way fat does. Fat traps toxins. So it's just, yes. So message is, like, this work isn't separate from, it's not like meant to only be on the meditation cushion or in yoga class or on this podcast, and then you go and you eat like a hot dog and you fight with your partner. Yeah. I'm all about the combination of the material and the spiritual. The mundane and the divine are coming into balance now. So that means our money is becoming much more sacred, and that also means our recognizing the spirit that's in our bodies and how they work together. You know, it's not meant to be separate anymore, where you go to church and that's where you pay respect to the divine and then you live your life in chaos. It's meant to be integrated. So for example, my last book, The Dragon Master Creatrix, is the story of a woman meeting me over in the UK for the international retreats when I do those trainings of Vibrational UPgrade certified practitioners. And it's her telling the story in the beginning of each chapter, and then I'm answering. It's a question and answer format at the in the second half of actual questions my masterminders getting trained in Vibrational UPgrade System are asking. And they're not questions only about like, how do I actually have the balls to follow my intuition when it's challenging to do something new. It's also, how do I stop caring when other people judge me? So that's what I mean. It's like it's practical. It's this path. It's not about like going out of your body and hovering above your head, channeling. Yeah. So I really want to hit that home, because I feel like there's still that misunderstanding for especially newer people who are just awakening that all this stuff means such big stuff. It doesn't. Start with yourself and your beliefs, and where are you saying you want A, and you find all of your actions going towards not A. Yeah. Yep. That's essentially what it breaks down to as well. But again, it's easy, but it is that more deeper inner work that doesn't have to be difficult. But for me, it is coming back to, like you're saying as well, it is that whole level, whole being, holistic, intentional living, and that is moment to moment. Like, the work doesn't stop. It's moment to moment. It gets easier. You find your groove, but it's moment to moment. And, you're up, you're down, but it's all good. I think play, what is possible. It becomes so much play. Totally. Like the dragonflies and butterflies and birds come in and interact with you, and the breeze from the trees interact with you, the spirit of the land. I mean, like, it just is not only work. Oh, I know. And that is the best part, because believe me, as a person as well who was so restrictive, so linear, so afraid to like play and all this, now I am that person. I'm like, oh my God, there is magic in every moment. Like you say, the beauty in the mundane and the divine in the mundane is the most magical way of living. So it is epic. And thank you for such a wonderful conversation. I loved it. And please, yes, share where people can find out more about your incredible work as well. Thank you. So you heard me mention books. Go on Amazon. All 4 of them are there. Alison, 1L, J, middle initial, Kay, because there's another author from the UK, Alison J Kay, and it's not what I'm writing about. VibrationalUpgrade.com is my website. There's also a free Facebook group if you want to come and join and play in there.
Brilliant. And like that, I will link them all on the show notes as well, anyway, as well from my website. But thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. I truly enjoyed it, and I wish you the best.
Yeah, blessings to you. Buenos dias, Samana.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified every time a new show is released. Get more information on this week's guest as well on my website, www.soulpowerlight.com.